right, so today's hand comes from my man Richie, who is playing a tournament, 50-100 blinds, early stages of the tournament, finds himself with 2 nines mid position. It goes open to 225 early position. We get a couple callers. Richie decides to 3-bet here to 950. I prefer actually calling in this spot. This is one of the pivotal moments in the hand that sort of leads up to all the other things that happen in the hand. And this is a spot where I got to stop you and say, man, I much prefer calling here because you prevent yourself from getting blown off the pot. If someone wakes up with a hand behind you, now you're forced in a tough spot where you got to put a lot of money in pre-flop with 2 nines. And if the original raiser, who's representing a ton of strength pre-flop by opening in early position, 4-bets you, either as a bluff or with aces or whatever, you still have to either put money in the pot when you're really behind and the pot gets huge, or you have to fold your hand and you give up all your equity. So I would much prefer flat calling here. If someone 3-bets behind you, you could still call because the pot is so small, your stack to pot ratio is so much bigger, your implied odds are bigger. I much prefer calling the 225, play for set value, and also you want to keep smaller pairs in the pot pre-flop so that when you flop a set, you could potentially go set over set and be on top instead of going set over set and being on bottom. So I prefer calling here. We end up 3-betting to 950, and now the button makes it 2100 cold. Folds back around to us, and Richie asks, do I have the right odds to call here? This is a really important spot to understand a little bit of the math involved. So you're getting about 3.5 to 1, and you know that you flop a set about 1 in 7 times. So you're essentially, in a way, a 2 to 1 dog in that you need to have twice the odds that you do to have direct odds to justify calling pre-flop to flop your set. So because you only have 3.5 to 1 and you need 7 to 1, what that means, you need to be able to make some of the money back post-flop in order to justify calling pre-flop without the odds you need. Now the question is, can you do that? Well, I think the answer is yes. Your opponent's repping a ton of strength, and almost definitely he's gonna be c-betting every flop, and you're at least gonna win 1 bet post-flop if you hit your set. So your odds in this hand that you're getting by calling pre-flop are about 3.5 to 1. You know that you flop a set about 1 in every 8 times, so you're not getting the direct odds you need to justify calling your pre-flop. But you're not on the river. You don't need direct odds because you have what's called implied odds, or odds that you're gonna win more money later on in the hand. Now your implied odds are pretty damn good. Your opponent is showing a lot of strength pre-flop. It's very likely that he's gonna c-bet post-flop, and you're never gonna put money in the pot unless you hit a set. You're not like gonna risk getting outplayed here, or nothing bad is going to happen. You're only gonna put more money in if you hit your hand. So it's very easy for you to recoup the money the times that you do flop a set. So I think your implied odds are good. You're justified to call the 4-bet here pre-flop. That being said, I still don't like it that much. Chips are so valuable in a tournament, and you never wanna put in 21 big blinds pre-flop out of position when you're hoping to hit your 1 in 8 shot. It's just not a great spot for your chips. That's why I much prefer to flat call the original raise pre-flop, keep the pot small, give yourself more chances to win the pot. Anyway, we call and we go heads up to the flop. The flop comes Queen 8-3 rainbow. We missed our set. We're probably gonna just check fold here, especially with our read, knowing our opponent is pretty damn tight. It's likely he has queens, kings, aces, or ace-king. We can't really call a bet on the flop. But we check, and now our opponent checks behind. Our reader here, Richie, says he thinks that it's really odd that his opponent checked behind. He never puts him on ace-king here, and I think he's right. I think the times that your opponent has ace-king, he's gonna c-bet the flop, repping queens, kings, or aces, hoping that you fold your 2 jacks or 2 tens, or your ace-king, which it looks like you have. So I never think that at this point in the hand, your opponent has bluffs. Even if he was bluffing pre-flop with something like jack 10 suited, I still think he'd c-bet the flop here and rep all those big hands and hope that you fold. At this point, I think your opponent has something with showdown value. He probably has something like a set of queens at best, of course, or he could have something like ace-queen and be playing for pot control, or he could have aces or kings. So it's important to understand conceptually what our opponent's hand range is and how we're gonna get more money in the pot later in the hand. The turn comes a 9. It also brings a flush draw. We opt to go ahead and lead on the turn now, about 2,600, which is a very healthy size bet. It's good to bet big here, and I like betting big if we're gonna bet. You gotta ask yourself, what hands is our opponent going to call a bet with? And I think your opponent is only gonna call with value hands, hands that he would have checked back the flop with, like ace queen, of course a set of queens, or kings or aces. The only hands that are gonna call you are hands that are gonna bet the turn if you check. The one exception to this is if he has something like jacks or tens, which will probably check back the turn, but call a bet as well. But the difference is you only win one street of value, I think, from jacks or tens. I don't think he hero calls you with that on the river, so you're only winning one bet regardless. And if you check the turn, you could value bet the river and win the same amount of money from jacks or tens. So I would probably check the turn here and go for a check raise, just because so often your opponent's gonna bet the turn with his kings or aces or ace queen, and now you could go get a check raise and win 3 bets instead of 2. If you bet the turn and bet the river, he's only gonna call. If you check raise the turn and bet the river, he's gonna call both those bets, and you're gonna inflate the pot and win a lot more money here. So I might check raise the turn here. It's a tricky play, but I like that line. That being said, you bet, your opponent calls, and we go heads up to the river. Now the river comes an offsuit ace, which is kind of a tough card for us to play. I mean, it's great on one hand if our opponent does have something like ace queen. A lot of players won't 4-bet preflop with that hand, so you really have to know your opponent here and know if he's capable of 4-betting with ace queen. If he's not, that tells you a lot, because it means your opponent's range in this spot is specifically jacks or tens, which are gonna fold if you bet, or a set of queens, 2 kings, or a set of aces. Now, kings might fold the river if you bet as well. So you're not really getting value from that many hands, even though that's crazy to think when you have third set in a 4-bet pot. Just the way the hand played out is so specific that there's just not many hands in our opponent's range here. We're also not bluffing that often. There's not many hands in our range, so it's really hard for us to get a lot of value here. So I would probably bet this river if I bet the turn. That being said, just because people like to call, I'd bet like 4,800. I would probably fold to a raise just because I don't think I'm ever getting bluffed. My opponent's never going to turn a hand into a bluff here, and he just never has any bluffs. So I would probably bet the river here just because people get stubborn, they like to call. He might talk himself into a call with 2 kings. Sometimes I'm wrong on my reads and people show up with all sorts of weird hands in tournaments that you wouldn't expect them to have. They might not be playing on the same level as you, and they might just not be protecting their range or having the range that they're supposed to have. So I would probably bet here half the pot, go for value. You have a set. I mean, it's not like your hand is terrible, but I would just be concerned. So anyway, we decided to check here, which I think is fine. I mean, I'd probably bet it, but you know, checking is okay in the sense that if you really think your opponent's never going to call with worse, and the only way to get value is, you know, maybe if he bets worse or something like that. But I mean, checking is tough because you're probably going to call a bet anyway, and it's much more likely that your opponent calls a bet with a worse hand than it is that he bets a worse hand. So you're going to check call anyway, and you're sort of allowing yourself to put money in the pot more often when you have the worst of it, which is why I prefer to bet. Anyway, you decide to check. Okay, fine. He bets half the pot, and now you tell me that it's 50-50 in your mind. You don't know whether he's bluffing or he has a set, and you don't know what to do. Well, first of all, if you ever think it's 50-50, you should call, because you're getting a great price on your money. The pot's 15,000, you're calling 5,000, you're getting 3-1. You only need to be right 25% of the time to justify calling. So if it's 50-50, you're gonna be profitable by calling here, and profitable by a great margin. But I don't really know if it's 50-50 when he bets the river. It's a really hard spot to know exactly how people are gonna react here, but I think that it's you know, unlikely that you have the best hand, as crazy as that sounds. But I still always call here. I would call all day. I would snap call. I wouldn't really be like thrilled about the pot, but it's an easy call, I think, in my opinion. You can never fold a set for this price. Too often people are just getting out of line, doing something stupid, or they even have ace queen and they think their hand is good. So I would always call here. It is what it is. I think you lost the absolute minimum, but I would mix up a few things to play the hand differently, because I think in the long run, especially with a check raise on the turn, I think that's just gonna win you a little bit more money. Anyway, this is a really interesting hand, a lot of dynamics going on here, and a lot of things to think about. So make sure you go back and review this hand and piece together all the different scenarios and really think conceptually about all the things we discussed. to figure out exactly how you could break down your opponent's range. I really think in this video it gives you a lot of insight into how you could get really deep into exactly what your opponent has. And when you really think about it, it's a spot where there's only 2 or 3 or 4 hands that your opponent could have on the river, and it's really sweet when you can narrow it down that well, because you could really see exactly what to do in a certain spot. So hope you enjoyed this video, took something from it. That's all for Texas Hold'em in Texas, and I'll see you guys next week on the Hand of the Day. Take it easy.